Right, good day, grade 12. Today's lesson, I'm going to focus on the industrial development strategies. I just want to take you back to your guideline. You will see that in terms of your strategies for industrial development, you only need to have brief knowledge. Here it is. You need to have an overview and the focus area of the NRDS, and then also an overview and the focus of the IMS. All right, so if we look at the NRDS first, okay, you obviously need to know what the abbreviation stands for. NRDS is the National Research and Development Strategy. And what this strategy is all about is to address certain weaknesses in our industrial development. Now, we said in previous lessons that we were faced with some deindustrialization. Our secondary sector is shrinking instead of growing. So we need to address that in terms of identifying the weaknesses. Where do we need to make improvement? And one of those weaknesses, the areas, the focus areas, obviously, is to make available appropriate funding for research and development. Obviously, industrial development is based on research, coming up with new ideas, new ways of doing things, and research, unfortunately, is very, very expensive. All right, a lot of businesses just don't have the funding to pay for the research to come up with new innovative products or production methods. So one of the weaknesses that we need to address is so that financing is made available a little bit easier. People find it easier to find the funding and the finances in order to promote research and development. Then in terms of strategic considerations, obviously there's certain areas where technology is changing extremely fast. Okay, we know that we live in the fourth industrial revolution. Technology is being improved very fast. Every year, cell phone technology improves, IT, everything is digital nowadays. And obviously, when the world is becoming technologically more advanced, we also have to develop our competencies in these areas. You'll remember that with the previous things that we looked at, ICT was a focus area. It is something there where we have the ability in the future to become very good at. So it is important that when technology is changing, that we obviously upskill our workers and that we are competent to deal with any changes in technology. Right, then we also have to make sure that our human resources in science and technology is developing. This is why at schools there's a lot of focus on science and technology. At the moment, our scientists that are out there in the job market, it says that we have an aging and shrinking scientific population. So obviously the scientists that we do have, the very qualified scientists that we do have, they are aging, they're becoming old, they're busy retiring, and we don't necessarily have anybody to replace them with. So the scientific population is shrinking. There's less and less scientists that are qualified to do certain things. So we have to focus on the two subjects of science and technology so that we can have new scientists to replace the scientists that are retiring. We need to replace them with competent scientists. And we can only do that if we develop our human resources, if we invest in education and training in terms of science and technology. All right, then the next weakness or the next problem is that there's declining research and development in the private sector. As I said, it is obviously hugely expensive, so the finances are a big problem. Privately owned businesses, they don't always have the finances to pay for the research to come up with innovative products or production methods. And this means that we are becoming followers instead of innovators. We are waiting for other countries to be innovative, to come up with stuff, new technology, new products, and then we just copy what they do. We are never ever going to move forward like that. We need to be the innovators. Others need to follow us. Okay, and then in terms of intellectual property, we do need to develop our competencies. So in other words, we need to upskill our workforce, or we're going to face exploitation with respect to our own resources. We are obviously a country that is very rich in resources, okay, mineral resources, agricultural resources. And the problem is that we are not processing our own resources. We are exporting them as commodities, unprocessed, because we don't have the industrial base to process before we export. All right, so obviously we need to train our people, we need to develop these competencies, we need to establish industries, train everybody so that they're competent at their job, so that we can process our own raw materials before we export them. Otherwise, other countries are basically using us as a source of the raw materials. We sell them very cheap raw materials, they process it, they become wealthy using our resources. All right, so industrial development is very important so that we can capitalize on the resources that we have. All right, and then the last problem is the fragmentation of government, science and technology. Fragmentation means it's basically seen as two separate things. They see science as one thing and technology as another, whereas it is basically the same thing. Now, we have to combine science and technology. We need both science and technology if we want to move forward. All right, so those are the key weaknesses that the NRDS is supposed to address. Okay, so the objective basically of the NRDS is to address these weaknesses in a practical way. So we need to find solutions for these weaknesses. How can we turn these weaknesses into strengths? All right, and the ideal is that we need to apply internationally tested principles, but we have to adapt them to local realities, local requirements. All right, again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Other countries have faced deindustrialization as well. Even the industrialized countries have faced deindustrialization. We need to go and see what did they do to address similar weaknesses, the same weaknesses that we have. How did they address those in other countries? And if there's a way that they have used that we feel is appropriate for us, we can obviously use their solution, but adapt it for our own situation, the local realities, the local labor force, the local capital market, whatever. All right, it has to suit us. We obviously can't just use an international strategy as it is in our own country. It is not necessarily going to be as successful because our situation is different, but we look at what they do and then we adapt it to suit our situation. All right, the strategic objectives is obviously to promote innovation and technological change. We have to move forward with the times. We need to embrace changes in technology. And as I said, we need to become innovators and not just follow what others are doing. We need to innovate. We need to research. We need to come up with new things so that we can make money out of our own innovation. Okay, very important that we increase our investment in our science base, both in terms of human resources and transformation. Obviously, as I said, research is expensive. So obviously that is going to cost money, but we need to allocate more funds for research and development. We need to allocate more funds for the upskilling and the training of our human resources so that we can obviously fill the gap in terms of the scientists, the shortage of scientists that we have. And then lastly, we need to create an effective government science and technology system. Obviously, it has to be driven by the government. All right, the second strategy that we're going to look at, and this is one that they ask relatively often. All right, so I would suggest that you make sure that you know that you have enough information on the IMS. Obviously, this is not an essay question. They can use this in a data response question or for an 8-mark discuss question. All right, IMS stands for the Integrated Manufacturing Strategy. So the focus of the IMS is to improve our competitiveness in the manufacturing industry. All right, so part of the secondary sector, remember we said in the secondary sector we have manufacturing, electricity, gas and water, and then construction. So the IMS focuses specifically on manufacturing as a component of the secondary sector. And the idea is that we want to make our manufacturing businesses, our factories, more competitive. All right, and as I explained before, to make something more competitive, it basically means that we need to improve the quality of the products, but we have to reduce the prices. Okay? Internationally, people will only buy from us. Local people will only buy from local sources if the prices are competitive. So the focus of the IMS, the strategy, is to make our manufacturing businesses, the manufacturing industries, more competitive. All right. They focus on certain things. Okay, the first thing there is the prices of inputs. Obviously, you use your inputs in your production process to produce your outputs, and inputs would include your factors of production. It is things that you need to pay for. So obviously, the prices of production factors has an impact on the prices of the finished goods. the more we pay for our production factors, the higher our production cost is going to be, and then the higher our selling prices, making us less competitive. So we need to basically look at strategies of how we can decrease the prices of our inputs so that we can decrease the production costs of these businesses to make them more competitive. The second focus area is to improve the infrastructure. Okay, obviously, we spoke about the efficiency, but also the cost of infrastructure. Transport, communications, electricity supply, it has to be consistent, okay? It has to be efficient. The trucks need to be moving around on the roads. There shouldn't be backlogs. There shouldn't be bottlenecks at the harbours. So the infrastructure needs to work efficiently so that we can get raw materials to the factory when we need them on time. We can get the finished goods to the market on time. Efficiency is important. Electricity, a constant supply of electricity, because obviously your factories cannot operate if we have load shedding, for example. So we need to improve the efficiency of the infrastructure. But as I said, also the cost. We looked at this when we did the supply side measures. We need to decrease production cost. That will make businesses more competitive. And infrastructure, what we pay for water, what we pay for electricity, for petrol, for transport, most of this is under the control of the government. So we also need to reduce the cost of infrastructure to decrease the production cost of businesses. The third focus area is technology and innovation. Okay, as I said, when we did the NRDS, obviously we need to innovate. We need to invest in research. We need to come up with new products that can satisfy needs. We need to come up with new production methods. And this will obviously improve our competitiveness. We need to become more productive, and that comes through the implementation of technology. But hand in hand, obviously, with technology goes skills development. We cannot implement technology unless people are literally trained on how to use the technology. It is pointless if we have technology, but our workers are unskilled and they cannot actually use this technology. So when we opt to becoming technologically more advanced, we're implementing new technology in our production methods. We also have to upskill the workforce so that they can understand how the new technology works and they can use this technology efficiently so that they can improve their productivity. And then lastly, effective regulation, again from the government side. Remember, if we want to improve the competitiveness in our businesses, if we want to increase their supply, make them more cost effective, obviously, the government cannot over-regulate the businesses. Deregulation is going to improve competitiveness in manufacturing because the more regulations, the more laws businesses have to comply with, the more expensive it becomes. All right, because it costs them money to comply with all the legislation in terms of BE returns that they have to submit. They have to appoint a person to work with QUEDA, the Skills Development Act, that skills that we are enforced. The Skills Development Act, businesses have to be compliant with that. Training is going to cost them money. So the more laws and regulations there are, the less competitive our manufacturing businesses would be because it is financially very expensive to comply, make sure that they're compliant with legislation. They physically have to appoint extra people, etc., etc. So when the government passes laws and they impose regulations on businesses, we have to make sure that there's a purpose behind the legislation and that it is conducive to industrial development, that it's not going to prohibit new businesses from being established. All right. Now, obviously, also very important is integration with the international economy. Obviously, we need to be aware of what is happening also outside of our country, in other countries. We need to increase the knowledge intensity in production. As we said previously, move towards a knowledge-based economy more than physical labor. All right, we need to see what are the international trends, what are they doing in other countries that are working, and we can use those strategies once we've adapted them for our local situation. All right, now the IMS consists of 3 different elements. Okay, the first element is cross-cutting issues, okay, issues that cut across the whole strategy. Sometimes they call it cross-cutting issues. Okay, make sure that you understand that. Okay, the second element is the key inputs, and then the third element is the key growth sectors. So the cross-cutting issues is, for example, the first one there, improving your social and physical infrastructure. Okay, as we said, we cannot make them more competitive unless our infrastructure is effective and it's affordable. Okay, the more expensive it is, the less competitive our industries are going to be. So we have to improve social infrastructure like the education and training systems. Obviously, we said that we need to invest in our human resources. We need to upskill our labor force. So social infrastructure is very important in terms of the training that it can provide. We also need to improve our physical infrastructure, our transport systems, our electricity, communication systems. All of those have to be improved so that the distribution of goods and services can be more efficient. All right. Then, very important, providing access to financing for small and medium enterprises. If we want to encourage industrial development, obviously we want to encourage the establishment of new industries. To establish a business, unfortunately, costs a lot of money, and people don't necessarily have access to financing. So in order to encourage industrial development, we obviously have to make sure that small and medium enterprises can have access to financing. Okay, and where the institutions that they can approach is the IDC. Okay, I already mentioned in a previous lesson that the IDC is focused more on larger projects, okay, so larger loans, not so much small ones. We have Westgrow, we have Kula Enterprises, and then the SMBDC, or the Small Business Development Corporation. All right, so facilities must be made available so that people can actually approach them for financing. Low interest rates, affordable loans. Okay, then very important also is the SETAs in terms of skills development, sector and education and training authorities. Remember, there's different SETAs for different industries. So it's very important that these SETAs are established, that they function properly so that they can make sure that training is provided in the different sectors of the economy where it is needed so that we can promote industrial development. And then very important, as we said in the NRDS as well, we also need to create technological development, which only comes about as a result of research and development. So investment in research is very, very important. No technology only comes about, any technology, any going forward, only comes through research, trying something, making a mistake, fixing it, trying something else, but obviously that costs a lot of money. Okay, we cannot have industrial development if we do not move with the technology. If technology changes, we need to make those changes, and this only comes about through research and development. The key inputs, you will see this is all components of infrastructure, transport, communications, and energy, because no manufacturing concern can function properly unless these key inputs, which is infrastructure, is available, it is efficient, it works, and it is affordable. Right, and in the key growth sectors, these are the sectors that was identified as key growth sectors. So these are the sectors that where we have the potential for growth. Okay, so in terms of exports, export industries that we are going to focus on is the clothing and textile industry. You'll remember this was also a focus area of the IPAP. The motor vehicle industry, car manufacturing industry, motor vehicle parts, also part of the IPAP. Mining and agricultural products that we are exporting. Remember, the focus here is on value-added products. So not commodities, mining commodities that we export. We take the gold, we turn it into jewelry, and we export that. Okay, same with agriculture, value-added exports. Process before we export. Right, and then in terms of tourism, I mentioned before that this is the fastest growing industry internationally, but also in South Africa. So obviously we need to improve the marketing of our tourist ventures. We did talk about marketing of tourism in the tourism chapter 13. Okay, so this links in here. Obviously we want to promote tourism to South Africa. We want to promote both domestic and international tourism, but obviously the international tourists are the ones that brings the injections into our country, which then obviously will multiply and create high income levels for us. All right, so the idea is that we improve the marketing, we market our country as a prime tourist destination so that we can increase tourism. Right, in terms of agriculture, agriculture obviously is a strategic industry. We need to be able to feed our population. So it's very important that there's a plan in place for agriculture. Agriculture is a very challenging industry to get involved in. Obviously, it's very reliant on the weather and the climate that we have no control over. So there has to be a support plan for agriculture to make sure that we are able to satisfy our own agricultural needs, and then obviously in terms of exports have enough to export to other countries, which serves as an injection for us as well. ICT, information and communication technology, you'll remember this is also identified as a key growth sector in the IPAP. It's one of those sectors where in the long term we have some potential. Obviously, as I said, everything is digital, everything is becoming more computerized. We have to focus on this, we have to move with the times. Right, and then lastly, in terms of cultural products, obviously, when we did tourism, we also said that we have lots of different cultures in our country. We have to improve the marketing of our music, our movies, the art festivals, the different cultures that we have. We have to use that as basically an attraction. It creates tourism to begin with, but obviously it is something that the African people are very good at. People in South Africa is very good in terms of cultural products. We are creative, we are talented, and we need to use that. So that is also identified as a key growth sector because it's an area where we have a lot of potential. Okay, now if we look at the focus areas of these policies and actions, okay, the targeted industries, sectors, and the regions, okay, apart from those identified already, obviously we create clusters of sectors, and we said that each IPAP, the IPAP is reviewed every year with a 3-year forecast. But obviously, we move, we see what have been changing, what has been happening in South Africa, and then we move with the times. Each IPAP, we remove industries, we add new industries with potential, all right? But these are the list of interventions through the IMS that was made in certain targeted industries, all right? If they ask you about the targeted industries, this is what you're going to do. The key growth sectors, you're going to give them this, okay? But this is just, this is just areas where they have made interventions through previous IPAPs, through all the different IPAPs before, they have made certain interventions in certain industries. This is a list of those industries, okay, where interventions have been made and are continuously being made. All right, so it's advanced manufacturing, our creative industries, which you referred to already, the automotive components, car manufacturing industry that we've mentioned, aerospace and defense. Remember, this was added in IPAP 3. The biofuels, boat building, BPO and outsourcing, we've spoken about that with the IPAP as well. Advanced materials come from the IPAP. Mineral beneficiation, value-added services, adding value to our minerals before we export them. Electrical and telecommunications industries, the forestry, timber, paper, and pulp. Remember, we spoke about the success of the interventions that happened here. Green industries, in other words, environmentally friendly industries, industries that don't have such a big negative impact on the environment. Metal fabrication, okay, again, value-added services. The music industry links in with the creative industries. Nuclear industry was added in IPAP 5. Software industry is part of the ICT. Your set-top box, STB, that connects television and external sources of signals. Plastics, pharmaceuticals, tourism, as identified earlier. Upstream oil and gas services and equipment. All of these areas are areas where the government have intervened to create growth in these industries. All right, then in terms of clusters with potential, this was added, we've mentioned this before in IPAP 3. Okay, remember these are the clusters, sectors that have been identified where we have long-term potential. So sometime in the future, we have the potential to become really good at this. We discussed this under IPAP 3. So that would be the nuclear industry, advanced materials. Okay, remember I said in terms of the textiles that we are using, it lasts longer, it's more durable, it's more elastic, it doesn't distort as easily. We are improving the quality of our textiles. Aerospace, defense, electrotechnical, and then ICT. We did discuss this. All of these clusters where we think that in the future we can have the potential for massive growth. We have the competency to grow these industries and become really good at it. Right, then special economic zones. We are going to look at this in detail later. It is part of the essay question later. This is obviously just an introduction. The special economic zones was introduced through IPAP 4, and this basically consists of a range of industrial parks and the provision for economic infrastructure so that value-added services can happen in these special economic zones. Okay, it's specifically identified areas of high industrial development where all the infrastructure that is needed by manufacturing concerns are made available, and there are fast growing industries inside of these zones. All right, the idea is that we focus, these are not developing areas. We only have one SEZ in our country, and that's the industrial area surrounding OR Tambo Airport, Okay, so obviously the focus here is industrial development, all right, in special economic zones where specific areas where all the infrastructure, top-notch infrastructure is available to businesses that settles inside of these SEZs so that they can become more competitive, so that they can become more productive. We kind of give them everything that they need so that they can be successful. But as I said, the SEZs I will talk about in detail in the next section. Obviously, that is very important also, not for an essay question, because this was the essay question last year, but for data response questions and 8-mark discuss questions this year. All right, and then we also mentioned that we also support industrial development in the rest of Southern Africa. We do not only focus on industrial development in South Africa, we support regional development across the borders into Southern Africa and into the rest of Africa as well. All right, you'll see when we talk about the corridors, we are going to talk about corridors, that is areas where investment is happening so that we can have industrial development. But some of those corridors starts in South Africa and stretches into Southern Africa as well, because we also support Southern African development, industrial development in the rest of our region. All right, but we will talk about that in detail later.